Good evening, TNT family. We are here once again with our Dr. Gopeesingh, who is our current senator, former Minister of Education, and we're going to be discussing the effects of the shutting down of Petrotrin, our refinery business, and the effects that it has on our economy. So, Dr. Gopi Singh, I want to welcome you back to USC USA, and I would thank you for taking the time out of your busy schedule to join us. And could you enlighten us of the effects of shutting down the refinery business on our economy and our people?
Well, Gary, thank you for having me on your program, and a very good evening to your viewing audience and your listening audience. It's a privilege and honor to be with you on your program once more. I think I've spoken ad infinitum on health and education, um, but this is an opportunity for us to discuss some issues related to the foreign exchange issue that we're having in Trinidad and Tobago. And the forex shortage is as a result and a culmination of the People's National Movement gross incompetence and mismanagement over the last 9 years. Trinidad and Tobago is finding itself in tremendous difficulty, where the serious ration of the United States dollars to individuals who get $100 per day if they're traveling abroad. They have to go in and line up in the bank and get $100 on a daily basis. So if they're traveling, they will probably have to line up for a month to get 3,000 US dollars. Even that, and then the small and medium enterprises are now having to go on the black market to purchase US dollars on the black market, which is also not readily available. So Trinidad and Tobago has found itself depleted of foreign exchange for US dollars as a result of a number of negative issues that had this government failure to bring in foreign exchange. There had been basically almost no foreign direct investment in Trinidad and Tobago over the last 9 years. International companies did not come into Trinidad to invest, and even the smaller companies and medium-sized companies have not thought it fit to come to Trinidad to invest because of a number of reasons. They have not facilitated with the business enterprises to be able to deal with their desire on a fast scale in terms of approval for businesses to begin in Trinidad. But one of the major issues is that I think you were discussing just a while ago, the information that came out under the Freedom of Information Act, which was asked by the opposition, by our team, and which showed, you remember in 2017, Prime Minister Rowley decided to close Petrotrin after he said before, just a day or two before, a few days before, he's not closing Petrotrin. I am not closing Petrotrin. And if you buy your fridge and you're opening your door, I want to tell you that we are not closing Petrotrin. A few days later, he closed Petrotrin. So he was lying to the population in the first place. But all of this resulted as a result of trying to protect his friend, which we call now fake oil, the gentleman, from being able to be investigated properly, so that he closed down the entire of Petrotrin, so that all the evidence and circumstantial evidence and so on would not be available for any inquiry. If any inquiry takes place, they would not be able to do anything. So that still remains the major reason why he has closed Petrotrin. Not because he made the excuses that Petrotrin was losing money, and Petrotrin, that you would lose $4 US on every barrel of oil that you refine. But all of that has been a lie. Well calculated lie to the population. But the truth is that without any hesitation, he closed Petrotrin to save his friend from all circumstantial evidence which would have been available in various departments throughout Petrotrin. You'd remember one of his friends was saying that he was pumping oil and so on into a tank, and the tank, they would measure the amount of oil in the tank, and then suddenly, then he would be paid hundreds of thousands of dollars on a monthly basis. And then it was discovered that he overvalued the amount of oil that he said he was producing by over $100 million. So immediately that came to the forefront, Rowley found himself in trouble because everyone knows that fake oil is his good friend. And so he was in a dilemma. And when he was asked about that while he was abroad, he said, well, he called his friend to find out what was happening when, according to the jargon, when they mark bus. So he flew down back to Trinidad and he set up a team to investigate what was going on. He implemented a team to investigate the matter. And at no time the team made any recommendation of closing Petrotrin. In fact, the team was very vehement about saying that we are not closing Petrotrin. They had I can't remember his name now, but he was the head of the team, and he said, we are not closing Petrotrin. And then Rowley himself said, we are not closing Petrotrin. And just a few days later, he closed Petrotrin. So in effect, he closed Petrotrin to protect his friend. And the results of that, the sequelae to all of that, Trinidad and Tobago is now reaping the whirlwind of negativity in terms of almost every aspect of life in the energy sector and in terms of earning foreign exchange. Let me just give you some information on Petrotrin. Well, when they closed it down, they decided, I think most people will know, to form 4 companies. I think was Paria Trading was one, Trinidad Petroleum Holdings Limited, Guaracara, and Heritage. These are the 4 companies that they formed. There are about, I believe, 7,000 workers. So 7,000 workers were thrown on the breadline. And also all the companies that did business working in Petrotrin in different contractual areas, all these small companies had to close as well. And then all the fence line communities around in Pointe-a-Pierre and Guaracara, thousands of citizens were affected as a result of the closure by Petrotrin. So besides 7,000 Petrotrin workers going on the breadline, and even losing a number of other areas beside their monthly earning, they began to suffer. And so the whole Guaracara and Pointe-a-Pierre area, the fence line communities, everything went dead, closed. So there was no business activity taking place around in that area. Now, he made the excuse, and he keeps on making the excuse, and a lie, a vicious lie, that Petrotrin was losing money every year. And a number of consultants who have examined Petrotrin's accounts have shown that Petrotrin was never losing any money. In fact, the last year before Petrotrin was closed, they were $2 billion in the positive from the balance sheets. But when you look into the aspects of depreciation and a number of other factors which the accountants deal with, they will say that by book, Petrotrin might have been breaking even, But when you look at the balance sheets, I have a friend who was a former managing director and a senior partner of PricewaterhouseCoopers, and a senior partner examined the books for 2 years, and he, together with a number of other people, and showed that Petrotrin was never losing any money. So when Rowley keeps on saying that every year Petrotrin will lose $1 to $2 billion, that is a naked lie. It was never so. So they have decimated the energy sector by closing Petrotrin. Now, what are the consequences? Petrotrin, are you there with me? Hello?
Yes, I'm here. I'm here with you. I'm
Right,
listening to you,
right,
Doctor.
okay. Right, okay. There was a release on this Freedom of Information Act which showed that Pariah Trading has imported, I sent it to you, where if you probably look at it, Pariah Trading has, over the few years that they were formed, have imported close to 8 billion US in fuel from abroad to service the country's needs. So that's 8 billion US in a few years, 4 or 5 years. And that is one of the main drainage of foreign exchange from Trinidad and Tobago. Then there are loans that Malcolm Jones took. I was in the lower house between 2007. Well, I served in the lower house from 2007 to 2020, 13 years. And was a member of the Public Accounts Enterprise Committee with Senator Mark and so on. But 2009, when we brought Malcolm Jones and a number of the directors of Petrotrin before the Public Accounts Enterprise Committee, and we found out that Malcolm Jones and his team had borrowed internationally 750 million US for work to be done on the refinery. I think it's part of a desulfurization project and all of that. 750 million US. That is close to 5 billion TT. Then in 2000, at 7.5% interest. Then in 2009, we discovered at that Public Accounts Enterprise Committee meeting that they also borrowed 950 million US at an interest of 9.5%. Imagine you're borrowing on an international market and having to pay 9.5% interest. So in that's for 10 years, when interest rates internationally would be 5.5% to 6%. So that's another area where this PNM government under Prime Minister Rowley has been found wanting. When Malcolm Jones did that in 2009, 2010. But the question is, Petrotrin had to be making payments, interest payments every year on 750 million US at 7.5%, and on 950 million US at 9.5%. So between 2007, which our government at that time, between 2007 to 2010, had to be paying the interest from Petrotrin. And from 2009 to 2019, at 9.5%, you could say 95% in interest, 9.5% for 10 years, of 950 million US. So that amount had to be paid by Petrotrin. So it was not losing money, it had to be repaying loans. Now, the 950 million US loan came to be reevaluated, and it was not paid. So you had to find that 950 million to continue because it was not paid. Only interest was paid. So they borrowed again in 2019, the same 950 million at 9.5% again. So you could imagine what has been happening. But
Let me just cut in here, Doc.
yeah,
I always thought it was 850 for the WGTL, and the liquids to gas, it was 700 plus. I wasn't sure what the exact figure was. At that same 9.5% and 7.5%, I believe it.
yeah.
I don't
It's
you
750 million at 7.5% and 950 million at 9.5%. That's
right.
what they borrowed in 2007 for 10 years and 2009 for 10 years.
So that
And
was the bullet payment that was supposed to be due
in
uh,
2019.
in 2019. Okay, go ahead.
And
Thanks.
so, in other words, so you have borrowed 750 plus 950, that is 1.6, 1.7 billion TT dollars, US dollars, 1.7 billion. Multiply that by 7. That cost the country probably close to 12 billion TT dollars, 12 billion. So the Malcolm Jones fiasco, with all the interest and payments and bullet payments and so on, plus they spent over $3 billion in the desulfurization project in Petrotrin to bring it to a state of, to the forefront in terms of refining. So another $3 billion had been spent there. Plus, Malcolm Jones went ahead and built a monstrosity near to the highway, costing 450 million TT and so on. So added all of that, Malcolm Jones and the PNM government have cost this country over $18 billion TT in loss so far. $18 billion. So this is just
And we still we still and we still owe
and we still owe
the
the payment of 950 million US,
which will be accruing interest
which
again
which
in
will give you probably like 10 years from then, 2019 to 10 years will be 2029.
so it will be
So,
at the
so
end of
that,
the day it will be closer
right.
to billion.
So that's the state that we found ourselves in before the closure of Petrotrin. Now, when the state, when we sued Malcolm Jones as a government for the mess that he created, it went before the courts. And as soon as Rowley and they took government, they worked with their attorneys to give them an opinion to drop the court matter against Malcolm Jones. So here is a man that cost this country, God bless his soul, cost this country over 18 billion TT dollars, aided and abetted by PNM government, and went scot-free. And the PNM government now having closed Petrotrin now to save one of Rowley's close friends, Take Oil. And
But Doc,
so
isn't it possible that I mean, we just seen that with the Rowley situation, right? Administration. Could you imagine what was happening under Eric William with the boom of our industry?
with the, I missed that, I beg your pardon, missed that. With the Eric Williams.
In the 70s and 80s when
All
the
right. Well, this is a history by itself of PNM, widespread corruption over the years, Gary and team. You would remember, you all were not even born then. I was probably a young 10-year-old. So in the late 1950s, the first thing was the lock joint scandal under Eric Williams, when there was widespread corruption in the lock joint, which is a sewer system in and around Port of Spain. Subsequent to that, then we had the Tesoro scandal, when there was a movement, a sale of one of the companies over to Tesoro, and there were multi-million dollars of widespread corruption at that time. So it's well known as the Tussero scandal. Then there was the DC-9 scandal, where senior members of government of the PNM leased aircrafts at exorbitant rates and so on for BWIA in those days. And they call it the DC-9 scandal. Then there was the Caroni Racing Complex, where we found that there was over a $50 million corruption issue in trying to build the racetrack in Caroni, which was abandoned after the public noise was made. Then when all the information began to come together, we found that John O'Halloran and Francis Prevat, two of the frontline ministers of the PNM government under Eric Williams, Dr. Eric Williams, had to leave the country and go to Panama to live because they knew that they could not have been repatriated to Trinidad to face any legal action. So you had Bury OY, Francis Prevat, and John O'Halloran fleeing the country, never to come back. And that is part of the history of PNM corruption. Then there was the overpricing of the Twin Towers, the financial complex, down on Wrightson Road in Port of Spain near the waterfront. Massive, widespread corruption and over expenditure in the financial Twin Towers. Also, the Hall of Justice. There was a cost overrun of over $200 to $300 million during the construction of the Hall of Justice in Port of Spain. Then, subsequent to that, in 1980, before that, in 81, when Soditeg was a company that was hired to do the Eric Williams Medical Sciences Complex, which was Mount Hope. I was a doctor at Mount Hope Women's Hospital in 1981. I did, in fact, the first gynecologic operation in Mount Hope Women's Hospital in 1981. And Soditeg was the French company that was constructing the Mount Hope complex. It was supposed to cost about $500 million. It ended up costing $1.1 billion. That is in 1981 to 85. Now, I have a phenomenal memory because I was working at Mount Hope in the Women's Hospital while the complex was being built. And so there was a cost overrun of about $600 million. Then recent undermining as well, the waterfront project, which houses Hyatt and the waterfront towers. That was supposed to cost $2.1 billion. Trinidad and Tobago citizens have to now pay $4.2 billion. I remember when we looked at the annual expenditures for payments in the Yellow Book, the famous Yellow Book at the end of discussions on the annual budget and so on, you would find that the Trinidad government had to pay almost, I think it was about $256 million per year for 17 years for that waterfront project. I believe we are still having to pay that amount, $256 million in the waterfront project for every year. Supposed to cost $2.1 billion. It ended up the total cost of $4.2 billion.
We seem to have a long history of this
widespread
repetitious
corruption.
cost overrun all the time.
Yeah. Well, I have termed it, I don't know if anybody, I have always said that PNM invented corruption, they perfected corruption, and they masterminded corruption. So they have their history and their DNA is widespread corruption from since they started in the late 1950s. And this regime as well, within the last few years, you have the parliament building costing nearly $500 million. Imagine the parliament, after so much was spent before, ended up costing another $450 plus million. The president's house cost close to $90 million. So then had a minister of government having said that $400 million for a highway to Manzanilla, then $200 million for a sporting complex in Diego Martin, then $150 million for the San Fernando Skinner Park, where the field now, you cannot even play a football game because it is not large enough, but over $150 million have been spent on that. So when you look around in Trinidad, those are just some. That's just the icing on the cake. That's just some of the areas of widespread corruption under People's National Movement, from administration to administration. Now, I've been in the politics for almost 30 years, since 1993, 1994. I helped Mr. Pandey with the National Unity Team, with Winston Dukra and Clive Pantin, Jennifer Johnson, Joe Tony, myself, Robert Sabga, George Lackey. So we helped him from the NAR, which I started in 1993, to form the National Unity Platform, where we were successful in transferring about 100,000 votes from the NAR to UNC, and UNC moved from 13 seats to 17 seats, and Mr. Robertson gave us the 2 seats in Tobago, 19 seats. So my journey, I mean, being a medical doctor for all these years, but I had a tremendous insight into the politics, what was going on, having been involved over a period of time. And this is why I could remember all these figures and so on, and because you lived it and you dealt with it. And I was just doing some research just a bit today, when under Prime Minister's questions on Wednesday, November 19, 2014, Dr. Rowley was asking how much is Petrotrin foreign debt, and can the Honorable Prime Minister confirm that it is being serviced in a timely manner? He asking that in 2014, yeah? And our Prime Minister, Mrs. Bisasa, said, this one may take a little longer to answer, but with your leave, we'll try to keep within time. In September 2002, the total debt of Petrotrin was TT $3.3 billion. By the time we came into office in 2010, the total debt has skyrocketed to TT 12.4 billion, which is almost 400% increase between 2002 and 2010. Of course, that was during the tenure of the People's National Movement when they were in government. So this is just one of the areas in the gas to liquid aspect as well. They spent over $3 billion, and the total foreign debt of Petrotrin went up by billions. So we have to service the loans of Petrotrin by utilization of foreign US dollars. So that's the interest. We have to service what we borrowed in in US dollars from abroad on the international market, close to about 7 billion US. So we have to be paying part principal and part interest. So 7 billion US at 5% or 6%, that's over $500 million US dollars in interest on plus principal every year. And we have to pay now $8 billion. We pay that over a period of about 5 or 6 years for fuel coming into the country. When Petrotrin Refinery was refining fuel products and selling and gaining foreign exchange. So instead of gaining foreign exchange when Petrotrin was on stream, we are now losing foreign exchange because we have to buy fuel from abroad. So Pariah Trading purchases over 1.2 billion or 1.3 billion US on an annual basis. So servicing loan servicing Petrotrin debt and having to deal with barrier trading fuel, we that is where the exodus of foreign exchange goes and US dollars. And
Doc, I have
none
one question though. Won't we refining Venezuelan oil for them at one point? We were refining the oil for Venezuela.
I'm
Uh,
not, no, I'm not sure where the oil came from, but let me just give you a little history there. Before going into medical school, I worked in Shell Oil Refinery for about 9 months in 1967, 68. And that refinery blew up one night. Big steel beams and so on, 3 feet wide, turned into S shape and so on. Max Richards and Ken Julian were working at Shell Refinery, but they were not on duty that night. They were engineers, young engineers. They quit their jobs and went to university. So that was Shell Refinery. I then went to Petrotrin, to Texaco. And Texaco, then I was in the refinery lab. I worked for about a year plus in the refinery lab. Mr. Manning, as Patrick Manning, father, worked in the research lab. And in the refinery lab, we were analyzing the impurities in the big normal paraffin tanks and so on. So at that time, Petrotrin was refining over 150 million barrels of oil per day. 150,000 barrels of oil per day in about 1969, 70, around there. And so that went on because we had to purchase oil from abroad and refine the oil, but we were making some huge profits as a result of this refining. And that went on to about 1990s and early 2000, when then over a period of time, the refinery began to become less and less productive, but still was able to refine up to about 80 to 100,000 barrels of oil per day. I'm not sure where we would have gotten the oil to come from, but we were making a lot of refined product selling on the international market. And so we were able to get some foreign exchange as a result of it. But having Petrotrin now being closed down, no foreign exchange coming, but foreign US dollars leaving the country on a daily basis from purchase of these things. So in a nutshell, PNM continues to destroy this country. They have destroyed the energy sector. And of course, they have destroyed everything that they've put their hands on. From 1962 to now 38 and 24, 62 years. They have governed this country for 46 out of the 62 years. And this is where they have taken Trinidad and Tobago down a precipice, and we have become a failed state. And we haven't even touched on the crime and the education sector, which have failed, the health sector, the economy, where citizens can't even know where their next dollar is coming from, where their next meal is coming from. Parents don't have money to send their children to school. They have money to buy clothes for them. They don't have money for books. Families are having to skip a meal on a daily basis. Some families having to skip a whole day of any meal at all during the week. It is well documented. The United Nations ECLAC group, Economic Cooperation for Latin America and the Caribbean, shows where families are suffering in Trinidad. And so unemployment is one of the worst that it has ever been. And well, then the crime has taken over, where 550 murders so far this year. And Manning Rowley has presided for over 4,000, nearly 4,400 murders in this country. It's shameless. It is unpardonable. It is sinful for any government to be in power for 9 years and cause the havoc and devastation of the lives of citizens of this country. And in the health sector, hundreds of patients are losing their life needlessly because of gross incompetence, mismanagement, and the government unable to provide the basic necessities and requirements for management of a health service. Well, the education, even if it's the worst ever that it has been in the history of Trinidad and Tobago, where in the education sector, 9,000 students who wrote um, CSEC recently failed to get a pass, and over 3,000 students out of 17,000 students in the SEA exam failed to get beyond 30%. We had brought that down to less than 1%. And within 1 year, when they came into office, by 2016, 1 year between 2015 taking office and 2016, they brought the failure rate back from where we had it to less than 1% to 14% of the students failing to get more than 30% in the SCSEA. And we had taken Trinidad and Tobago on the world stage in education. We were ranked almost on parallel with South Korea, or with Japan, with Hong Kong, with Finland. We were at the forefront of education. We were the center for virtual education in Latin America and the Caribbean, as named by the Organization of American States. We had the best academic performance in 2014 in almost in all the three examinations, ACA, CTEC, and CAPE, and we bettered it in 2015. And so, and then we were the first country in the world to have implemented early childhood education um, for every child age 4 and above, age 4 and 5. So we had achieved universal early childhood education. So now you remember PNM with under Prime Minister Manning decimated the Caroni area as well, where 100,000 citizens of central Trinidad were thrown on the breadline when they closed Caroni down. So PNM has a track record of pure destruction of the lives of citizens of Trinidad and Tobago. And it was Eric Williams himself too who closed down the rail project, the train line from the east to the west of Trinidad in about 1960, 61, around there. So they closed down the train line system. And then when they realized they need something like that, a mass transit system, Imbo decided that he is going to investigate it and do an analysis. He spent over $500 million for an analysis
A
of
feasibility.
implementing a rapid rail system on the East-West Corridor. So $500 million plus, and up to today, nothing has happened for implementation of any rapid transit system.
Yeah,
So
well,
the
I had a discussion with him on that because he wanted to run the rail, knocking down some people's house on the eminent domain. I told him he could have run the rail along the Gulf Coast and go straight into City Gate, right, through the Caroni Swamp.
yeah,
But he wanted to go through the old way and knock down people's house, and where people already living there. And that's the arrogant way he went about that. Beside top of the money. And Nadina, feel free to jump in anytime you want to. Nadina, let's join us here also.
Good
Yeah. So
evening,
this.
Doc. Good evening, Doc. Good evening, Gary. How are you?
Welcome,
How is
Nadina. Feel
everyone?
free to ask any questions. Go ahead.
Yes, good evening, Doc. Are you
good
hearing
evening.
me?
Yes,
Yes.
loud and clear. Mhm.
All right, wonderful. I am so pleased you will not believe to hear us talking about the forex situation the with respect to Petrotrin. It
Yes,
it
mhm.
it
I
hit
hope I have
me.
made it. Yeah,
Yeah, yes, because Doc, I am fed up of the economists and the analysts starting the story from we don't have enough forex. And nobody wants to adequately address the question, how did we get here when we know for a fact that what this situation that we are facing was not what we faced in 2010, 2011, 2013, 14, 15, even up to 2017. And nobody wants to take up that mantle and place accountability where it belongs. as to why we are in this situation. I want Trinidad and Tobago to listen and understand where the origins of the forex crisis that we face today where it started, because it is a missing part of the narrative and it seems to be deliberately so.
Thank you for making that contribution. I'm sure you have much more to say, but I have tried to give you a picture of the widespread wastage of money and the widespread corruption under Patrick Manning and subsequent to that, Rowley as well. So $18 billion being lost through Petrotrin, then stop the refining where you were gaining foreign exchange, but now you're spending over 1.2 billion US per year. And they have gone 10 times in the Heritage and Stabilization Fund, which is supposed to be protecting the country from any major financial eventuality. They have moved the foreign exchange surplus that we had of 11.5 billion US is now 5.5 billion US. Despite the fact, so they've utilized over 6 billion US from the Heritage and Stabilization Fund, going into it 10 times. We never, as a government, the People's Partnership Government between 2010 and 2015, interfered whatsoever. But we, in fact, put in close to over 2 billion US during our time in the Heritage and Stabilization Fund. So going into the fund, borrowing almost $6 billion US, and then moving the foreign reserves from 11.5 billion down to 5.5 billion. So you see, ma'am, there's over $6 billion moved from the foreign reserves, another 6 billion US from the Heritage and Stabilization Fund. So you see where the money from Trinidad and Tobago has gone, as you rightly said, and nobody, all these economists and so on who say they're the economists, they don't know the facts. They don't seem to understand and go deep into the evaluation of things. I hold no respect for any one of them because they're just floating on the surface of everything and pretending that they're big economists. I mean, with due respect, they would be economists, but get through to the facts of what really has brought Trinidad and Tobago into this state. They don't seem to be doing any research to understand what has brought us to this. Why are they not commenting on the reduction of the foreign reserve from 11.5 billion to 5.5 billion? Why are they not commenting on the 18 billion lost with Petrotrin? Why are they not talking about 10 times that the government has gone into the Heritage and Stabilization Fund? This country owes now over $125 billion. Over $125 billion. Yeah, that's what we owe now. And there's over close to 80% of the GDP. 80%. And when we came into office, it was 42%, and we left it at 62%.
Right,
So,
right, Doc. There's a point I want to make too, given all the stats that you're raising here, that's so relevant to understanding our current situation. This government, in my opinion, and in my firm opinion of that, is intent on rewriting the history of Trinidad and Tobago and removing from the minds of the population what was accomplished under the PP/UNC government. They want our history, they're into revisionist type policies, and they have removed, and things are being scrubbed off the internet as well. Now, therefore, what is our responsibility beyond this show, for example, to ensure that the full picture is given to our population so that when we stand up with a fuller knowledge of what transpired over the recent past and recent history. Doc.
yeah, certainly. Well, the meetings on Monday evenings are part of the whole process of disseminating knowledge and information and the negatives of the PNM. So we try as much as possible, and that has been going on for the last 3 to 4 years, with our Monday night meetings and our Monday night forum. Then we have been having we having press conferences almost on a weekly basis on Sundays, and even during the week on a Thursday. So for over the 4 years, we have tried to put out as much information as much as possible to the national population. And we are now also continuing some town hall meetings on various areas in terms of, we had a lot on crime. 2 weeks ago, we had on education. We're having another one on crime in Barataria pretty shortly. And then we have speakers on various aspects on health and education, on the economy, on infrastructure, and on crime, and so on. So we try to give a wide picture as much as possible to the population. And so, but we have to focus more intensely to give the raw figures in a more condensed manner, as I try to give tonight. And I take your point that we have quite a lot of work to do still to speak to the population of the urgent necessity for removal of this government. And so that we, hopefully the United National Congress will be able to secure victory and bring some degree of comfort and happiness to the citizens of Trinidad and Tobago, to bring back a better economic situation, to bring back a better healthcare, a better education program, improve the infrastructure and the social development aspect, where we have thousands of senior citizens unable to make ends meet. I mean, we can strongly say that on social media, our achievements between 2010 and 2015 under Mrs. Kamala Prasad Bisesa and our People's Partnership government, we have a 416-page document on our achievements. It's on the social media, the achievements of the United National Congress between 2010 and 2015. And these are some of the things we have to remind the population, showing what we did and what we are capable of doing again, and the dismantling of and the destruction of everything that PNM has put their hands on to. And I think it's a shame, it is shameful that the PNM has taken this country to the precipice in which we are now. They have destroyed almost every aspect of good governance.
Doc,
Indeed.
no,
Indeed.
Doc, I want to bring into the conversation some other spin-off effects that nobody seems to notice that happened in the country because of the closure of Petrotrin and other industries like Yara and Metal and so on, and the reduction of our um, industrial partners in Point Pisas. We have problems right now with our national insurance. Why? Because thousands, we have 7,000 plus immediate Petrotrin workers lost their jobs, plus the extra people from contractors and so on lost their jobs. So there are no contributions now to national insurance. So national insurance went into a spiral, a downward spiral. And that is why Imbert came in with the raising the age to 65, because national insurance is in trouble and they have to sell off assets, tangible assets, in fire sales to cover to stay afloat. That's one item that was a spin-off from the closure of Petrotrin. Apart from that,
The point is well taken. I appreciate that point. Yeah, because
Petrotrin,
7,000 contributing to the national insurance, yes, but a high wage.
yeah,
So,
correct. It was 7,000 plus the probably another 7 or 8,000 of the smaller contractors and so on that disappeared.
sure.
In addition to that, what we had happening because of the closure of Petrotrin, the Petrotrin employees, we had a discussion recently on another forum with Alicia, it was brought to the conversation where Petrotrin employees now are on the verge of losing their medical and pension
Yeah.
because of the closure, because there are no contributions. So how are they going to pay the younger people? The older people might get away and get their contributions when they get to 60. But the younger folks who lost their jobs, they're going to lose their pension and they're going to lose their health benefits and so on. Apart from that, when Petrotrin closed, Petrotrin had facilities. They had fire stations. They had fire stations in Pinal. They had fire stations in industrial level fire stations and health centers in all their offices in Santa Flora, in Pointe-a-Pierre, in Faizabad, in Point Fortin, in Pinal, and so on, and in Pointe-a-Pierre. All these facilities have been left to languish and go into total disrepair,
Disappear. Hmm. Yeah.
total destruction. Exactly what happened when Carney closed. All the Carney clubs, which could have been um, used for the communities, the Brecon Castle Club and the St. Madeleine Club and so on, they were left in disrepair and ruin. And they're building swimming pools all over the country. They built in Couva, they built in Lavantil, I believe they built somewhere in Tunapuna for millions of dollars. But we had existing swimming pools and club facilities that could have been used as schools. Instead of putting people in mandirs, we could have put them in the Petrotrin Club in Pinal. You have Pinal St. Dominic's RC School in the community center in Pinal. We could have put them in the clubhouse, which is a large clubhouse in Pinal, which is next to the fire station, the new fire station that was built. They could have put those students in that large building in the clubhouse, and they would have had a huge playground while they waited to have their school, the St. Dominic's RC School. But they have them stuffed in the community center in Pinal. They had the Ramaitres people stuffed in a mandir.
Yes.
They had
Yeah.
150 plus students in a mandir. And every time there was a function in the night in the mandir, they had to pack up the desks and come back in the morning to unpack desks and so on. Now they have moved into their school. And there are a number of schools all over. I believe there's a school in Piccadilly in somewhere in Port of Spain a primary school in a PNM constituency that is in half of the children in one side of the one school and another half in another part. There
Well,
was also
we can speak for hours on the education
yeah.
aspect. That is
If
school,
if we look at what
the
happened
school
to
dilapidation.
Guaracara Park, you can't even you have to graze elephants and giraffes in there because the grass is so tall. You can't put even cows there to
Yeah.
graze.
Guaracara Park was the center for athletics in South. All
Athletic
the southern
and
southern games. So they have destroyed the Guaracara Park. We used to have international cricket at Guaracara Park. I
correct.
played cricket on Guaracara Park ground many times in the
The,
past
so-
when I was playing cricket for Trinidad at the time.
the
Yeah, so
Palatino Velodrome is the same story.
they whatever they touch, it goes into destruction. It's gross incompetence, mismanagement, and widespread corruption. These are the hallmarks of PNM. And you touched on an area of school construction. We have about 450, 450 secondary schools in Trinidad, and about close to um, about 85 are denominational, that the rest are government schools. No, 100 and it's 125 secondary schools and nearly 460 primary schools,
Now,
and over close to 200 early childhood education centers. And
one
during Mrs. Beset's time, we built 106 schools, about 60, 65 plus early childhood education centers, over 30 plus primary schools, and about approximately 7 secondary schools. And we had left over 70 schools under various levels of completion. Some were 95% complete, some were 75, some were 25. And within the first year, there was a deliberate effort on the part of Rowley's government and the two ministers of education then to not to continue because of spite and vindictiveness and malice that has stopped the continuation of the school construction program. Today, 9 years later, all these schools are in ruin, dilapidated, things stolen, broken down. Many areas, the roofs have gone, all the toilet facilities, everything. And it's only within the last year, when the pressure has been put upon them, they have completed about 3 of these empty schools. So you really touched on a number of areas in terms of the help that Petrotrin as an oil company was providing to the entire country in South and Central Trinidad. And another thing which we probably don't touch on as much, when Petrotrin was there, all the areas around the oil industries were cleaned, the
Correct.
drains cleaned, the small tributaries leading to the rivers were cleaned, and that helped to prevent the flooding.
Flooding.
So,
Correct.
so now, with all these areas now with grass overgrown and they stop the flowing of the water and so on, that's why we're getting a lot more flooding
A
in
lot more.
Central and South Trinidad.
Correct.
So both Caroni, closure of Caroni, and
Correct.
closure of Petrotrin have contributed towards that. So the
Uh,
population have to be reminded and told of those things, how Rowley and Manning have destroyed this country, and they cannot afford, the citizens cannot afford to give them any ounce of time again to be able to govern this country anymore.
Yeah.
I,
Now there's another structure that I want to bring up because nobody knows about it. In 2017, I believe, or 20, under the Rowley administration and their board in Petrotrin, with I believe it was Malcolm Jones or whoever it was, they constructed a huge office building
yeah,
in Forest Reserve. A
no,
huge.
no, it was at the side of the highway going south in Petrotrin compound itself. It
No,
was,
no, but there is that. This is what I'm telling you. There is an existing pink building as you pass the gate in Forest Reserve. It was a brand new building that was constructed in Forest Reserve. I'll go down there and take some pictures, and
yeah,
it is
I'm not, yeah,
completely vandalized. It was a brand new building that was opened a few months earlier that year when they in 2018 when they closed Petrotrin. If they were planning to close Petrotrin, why did they invest in that huge office that is now completely in ruins? They have dug out the toilets. I was in there in Forest Reserve a few months ago, and I sneaked in because it was next to the guard gate. As you come through the gate in Forest
mm,
Reserve, I'm telling the exact location so people could go look for it. The media could go
mm,
and look for it. The clubs in Petrotrin, they have bacando trees growing in the swimming pool. They have the fire station is in total ruins with all the appliances. The fire tenders rotten and useless and so on in Forest Reserve. The
mm.
club is a total mess, and that club was a for a party venue for carnival fest. The strike squad practiced for their football match down in that club, and before they went up to the stadium for that football match that we lost in the stadium. That was
Yes,
an immaculate facility.
that's in 1989.
Correct.
Yes. Yeah, and don't forget the massive complex that Malcolm Jones was trying to build in Petrotrin,
Yeah, yeah, yeah.
four hundred
Huge,
and fifty
huge.
million on that. Hmm.
Correct.
And now it's just a white elephant with only a steel structure standing there.
So
So
the
when you look at all those things that this government under Prime Minister Dr. Rowley and former Prime Minister Mr. Manning, you feel nauseated. It
Correct.
sickens you. You feel helpless to have been subjected to this type of widespread corruption and mismanagement and gross incompetence over these last 9 years. And
But
it's
Dr. Let me tell
painful.
you,
Yeah.
something that's vandalized that's not apparent to us because it's not something physical. I do research, and we normally start off our discussions and research. So where do you see yourself in 5 years, 3 years time? What are your dreams? Or, to
Excellent.
contextualize whatever the research item is within a particular space. During the PP government time, and even up to 2016, when we asked people that in focus groups, they were, well, I see myself getting married, building a house, starting a
Milestone,
business.
exactly. Milestones
Right. You
and
know what it is now? When we ask those questions now, what it is? One, migrate. They want to migrate. They've moved from building a house, getting married, starting a new job, education, onto further. Two, I want to migrate just to be able to survive. I want to be able to pay my grocery bills. Those are the dreams that have been vandalized that we don't see out in the physical world.
And in fact, they fear for their life, their safety. So they want to get away
Exactly.
from being murdered. Yeah.
Correct.
Yeah. So in addition to the economic aspect, the crime aspect, their children's education, their own personal health, all these are reasons why, exactly as you're saying, people really fighting to migrate and get out of Trinidad and Tobago. You're very correct. And this is the sad state that we have reached. And the level of um, education has fallen so badly in this country that I believe if we do some research, we will find that possibly 1 out of 3, or even worse, 1 out of 2 citizens basically might be functionally illiterate in this country. And it is a sad state where almost on a yearly basis, about 8 and 9,000 students dropping out of school or having no passes. So multiply that by 20 years, that's 180,000 right there. But even
correct.
before 2000, when Mrs. Kamla Prasad Bisesa and Mr. Pandey built more secondary schools so that all students, whether 18,000 or 20,000 students writing essay, was able to get a place unable to get a place in a secondary school. By 2020, that came to an end, so that all students subsequent to 2020 writing the essay was able to have a place in a secondary school. But prior to that, between, let's say, independence or 1962 to 2000, possibly more than 10,000 students who went through primary school weren't able to get a place in a secondary school. So for about 30 years, between 8 to 10,000 citizens were deprived of a secondary education. So that's 30 by 8,000. It's about 250,000 citizens without a secondary education who may be alive today, plus those who have been failing in the last 15 or 20 years. So it's very sad how these people, for governing this country for 46 years, have destroyed this country in almost every aspect of life. And what is strange is that people still feel that they want to support PNM. You fought, you have told them the facts, they live in it, but they still, we have a fighting chance to remove them this time. And
Hopefully, we could continue the education. I just want to drop in here for 2 seconds. Doc, we can create some hope upon taking government where we create an after school program utilizing the secondary school for those who would like to go back and have a chance to improve their education and their job training. This is one of the proposals I made to our political leader about utilizing the secondary school for an after school adult training program for those who
great,
fell through the crack and want to have a
yeah,
chance.
great idea, Gary. That's part of the manifesto pledge. inside there. Utilize the school environment for after school for retraining the population. And God bless his soul, Minister Karim, during his tenure as tertiary education minister, had developed a number of tech box centers across the country with Roytech and then the UTT and YTEP, NSDP, MIC, a number of programs across the country that helped in the technical vocational education. And as you said, we can utilize these schools for adult literacy and education in mathematics and in English language and so on again, where we can re-educate some of the adult population who feel now that they have lost out on life and education, but we can bring them back into the mainstream of education and make them feel have a sense of well-being and mental comfort from the improvement in their own educational standards.
Go ahead,
Dan,
Nadina.
yeah, can I add to that? I would like to see the trade unions, whoever continue to exist today after many of them being decimated under the PNM, to expand their role with respect to supporting educational programs for especially our SEA students and so forth. I think that they should take up an additional responsibility, social responsibility in the country, given where we are at, and we need all hands on deck. One area I would like to see OWTU do specifically is to put out an art competition on the destruction of Petrotrin before and after. And that would get young people involved and those who are artistically inclined, both in terms of story writing, put out a competition, let people write the story of the destruction of Petrotrin, either as a children's story, as a teenage story. So we reach those younger persons, just as Hans Christian Andersen and Enid Blyton. And then we judge those stories and we help those persons, young persons, publish their stories out there. What it does is two things. If it's an art competition or a storytelling competition or a book competition, it gets the young people involved. It gets them to remember the real history and gets them involved in understanding what the truth is. Secondly, it helps build their involvement and esteem, and they become part of the right citizen that we are looking for. And that's the type of country I would like to see us focus on developing, Doc.
Thank you very much. I will make sure that I'm helping with the manifesto at this time on behalf of the party, and all ideas like this are very welcome. We're almost at a stage of completion of the manifesto in various areas in the crime situation, what we plan to do once we get back into government. So crime, health, education, the economy, infrastructure, public utilities, social development, a number of the labor, as you just mentioned, the party has been meeting with the labor movement. So thanks for that brilliant idea to cone down and to getting the children aware of where we had been and where we are now. So your point is well taken. And it's something that the team that works with the trade union, I will put this over to them so that they can probably engage the trade union movement in it. Your point is very much appreciated. All the points that you all have made tonight, I have jotted down, and we'll take that to the leader and to the team for further discussion and possibly implementation when we form government.
Some of the things that has to be considered before we go into major infrastructure is the flooding issue, dealing with the water and treatment and improving the holding capacity, building more water treatment plant, expanding, the capabilities there. There's the Oropuch area, the Guadalcanal area, the Caroni area, where we need to expand on the holding capacity and the floodgates and lots like that. So we have to deal with these things. The local infrastructure with the roads and stuff like that, I guess it's about 90% bad right now. So, I mean, we have to kind of, before we jump and start building some new highways and stuff like that, I think we have to focus on revamping some of our local roads and the infrastructure with the drainage and things like that before we can really push forward with building any kind of major highway.
Yeah,
Uh,
point taken. Very important point. Well, we all know that Trinidad is well known now for the hundreds and thousands of potholes existing across the country. And yet still there was a tax, a road tax that was implemented by this government, by the PNM government. And where is that money going? There's widespread corruption in road paving across the country. Friends, contractors, road paving, the extension of the Solomon Hochai Highway, when it's something that you could speak about for days on the the uh, the widespread corruption that exists in the administration of the contracts for infrastructure work and development. I mentioned a few earlier on, and that's just a tip of the iceberg.
Yeah, but how many highways have they really built with the kind of money they have allocated in the Ministry of Works? We haven't seen any real value for money, and as we've seen, the entire country is dilapidated with the roads and the flooding issue. They haven't done the basic cleaning. And what we discover also, as MP Tanku was saying, they clean the river and leave the silt right there to fall right back in. So there is no there's there's no common sense with how how the job is done and a waste of money. Uh, so maybe we have to look into all of these things. I am proposing where we set up, if we can get steel and we get lugs and interlock them along the highway, the river banks to prevent it from going back into the river. The as we dredge and stuff like that.
Yeah,
actually,
Uh,
it's
the,
not
the,
my forte, so I wouldn't want to make any comment because I don't have the engineering knowledge to know what has to be done in these things. But you leave that to the our engineers on the team and the Ministry of the Public Utilities guys on our team. But your points are well
Well, I'm,
taken.
I'm throwing it out there that we consider these things. I mean, it might not be feasible to buy a certain amount of steel as much as we need, but we could use in some places where we cannot afford to interlock the logs and try to restrain the silt from going back into the river, and things like that. Plus, we have a lot of infrastructure work to deal with the dams and creating floodgates and water treatment and industrial pumps and stuff like that. These are the things that we would have to look into. So something we can challenge our young engineers with their minds.
Yeah, yeah,
Gary, Gary,
yeah.
I do need to leave shortly because I have some personal things that I must attend to. But I
Yeah,
want
just
to
say
make
what you have to say and you can go ahead.
Doc, I want to raise one more point as you all are still collecting ideas regarding the manifesto. Very, very importantly, very absolutely importantly, two things with respect to agriculture. Management of of the African snails cannot be left to the individual homes. The proliferation of the snails, even those persons like myself who are trying to manage your grocery and supermarket bills by growing something, the plants are being destroyed. And that's not just me, a lot of people. So part of our we have to identify what are national issues and to take it up immediately so that families can help themselves whilst you all help the country. The second important thing with agriculture, we are no longer just selling food and buying food. People are buying nutrition and they're buying the idea of no harm or minimal harm done in terms of food consumption and food purchases. There's a greater role for Kariri in identifying the nutrient content of food because we're looking for nutrient dense food now to supplement and to help us become a healthier population. Kariri has to be the center point of how we're going to sell, how we're going to consume, and how we're going to develop agriculture. We must focus on nutrition, nutrients, and must label things accordingly. We have to stop, and I looked at something regarding coconut oil. And when the science coming from abroad told us coconut oil was bad, and now the science coming from abroad is telling us coconut oil is good after we have destroyed our coconut industry. We have to take ownership, and the only way we could take ownership is to fight science with science. And there is a greater role for Kariri, and I think CUC College, which is now Southern Caribbean College, they also have a strong research area that does this type of thing. So I leave that with you all, Doc, and it was a pleasure speaking with you and Gary. And thank you for your contributions that and continue to be safe.
Thank you very much for your contributions and for your ideas and to move forward and to take the country into a better place. Greatly appreciated, and I have noted your ideas that you want us to possibly incorporate in the manifesto in agriculture and food consumption and so on. So thank you, appreciate it. Have a nice evening. Greatly appreciate it.
Thank you, Nadina. Doc, I really want to thank you for taking the time. On this program here, there is no limit to time, but I know you had probably a busy schedule. But we could continue the conversation, ongoing, not only with the Petrotrin, but also the union and the history of what made our party what it is. You see, there's a lack of understanding, especially with the young people, our history and what we are about, and the substance of our party, because they are, people are consistently voting for the oppressor, and not recognizing our history of, that we are the ones that are always there trying to redeem them, or from the situation. We are the fighters, from starting from Mr. Butler, George Weeks, Baste Pandey, the things that Baste Pandey did, to help better the country and the conditions and stuff like that. So there has to be some kind of rehashing and reiterating the history as we go forward, so that the younger generation can understand what we're really about and the difference between the UNC and PNM.
Yeah, thank you, because that point is greatly appreciated. It's like it is lost with the young generation. I don't think they have a deep appreciation or any type of appreciation for the difficulties and the travails of their forefathers, what they have had to go through and undergone for them to come forward as a young generation to be successful. They seem to forget their past and they don't seem to have an appreciation. And I wish that the younger generation could have a greater understanding of what their forefathers have been through, the struggles. And they will tell you that, your forefathers went through difficulties and so on, but it's our time now. But to move forward, they must have an appreciation of what had gone on. And so the past has to be understood for us to move to the future. And as you rightly said, we have to try to engage them a little more. For instance, one of the major things I was telling someone recently, one of the greatest things that Mr. Pandey did in the sugar industry was to get the children of sugarcane farmers out of the cane fields. And so that when parents are trying to get more work done and make more money from cutting the cane and so on, the children were involved in it, in the cane fields early in the morning, up from 4 o'clock and 5 o'clock in the morning. And Mr. Pandey made sure that the children were removed from the cane fields. And that is how you have two generations of children who have now become professionals as a result of having moved out of the cane fields and gone into various professions. This is just a miniature aspect of what life had been and how the young generations have benefited from the hard work and toil of their forefathers. Just one example. But Gary, thank you very kindly for asking me to come onto the program. And I stand available with some timing in the future for any discussions on any aspect of the governance in Trinidad and Tobago or any particular area of governance. And thank you and the listening audience and the viewing audience via the social media for a wonderful evening of discussion. Thank you, Gary.
Thank,
And
thank you
you.
very much for taking the time. Deeply appreciate it. Yes, we must continue and to educate and clear the understanding of what our histories and what we are about and what we intend to do in the country. By the time election bell rings, there must be a clear understanding from inside and outside the country, or from our people must understand what we are about, what is our agenda, and what we are hoping to accomplish. So, Doc, with that, I will say good night. Thank you very much. Trini, you have any last words to say before you Doc goes?
Yeah, yes, look, thank you very much for a very enlightening and historical presentation, and bringing to the pertinent issues that affect the nation as it comes to foreign exchange and the other issues we discussed. And Nadina mentioned something very important about goals and milestones. And in your manifesto, we want to highlight that so that the population will understand that what our plan is supposed to be to take us forward. Because the PNM never had a plan from the beginning. Everybody admitted that. They admitted that to themselves too, and to the population. Plans and milestones so that the population would better understand the difference in government and the people aspect of governance that the UNC stands for. Um, Being there to help the people and take the country forward and holistic development of the entire country. Because if we look at what PNM did in their 50 plus years, they developed the one corner of the island to to United States standards, and the where the oil came from and where the sugar came from and where the agriculture came from in Labre and Sobo and Point and Moruga and Mayaro and Toko and so on, and La Joqueta remained in the doldrums. They set up housing estates to house voter padas in substandard housing. And the people every day on the news, you hear about these people. A woman was on the news today talking about her house leaking sewage for the last 4 years, and she is paying $6,000. Her mortgage is $6,000 a month for a house, and that is what we need to educate the population about, so that they will understand the difference in governance. Because the Pandem administration demonstrated, even the NAR administration, when we're talking about foreign exchange, if we remember back in the 1980s, we had negative lists for importation of items, and we had restrictions in foreign exchange. We didn't have credit card that were able to be used internationally and so on. And that is where we are again today.
That's right.
We are back to the 1980s, where you have to beg and buy US to travel, to go on a
That-
vacation.
That's right. And all as a result of the incompetence of the Rowley's regime and to another extent, Manning's administration as well.
Correct. It started
So,
way back in 2002 with Manning. It started way back there.
yeah, the exchange control issue. Yeah.
You said it earlier. He destroyed the legacy that was created by the Pandey administration. All the corrections and the improvements that Pandey achieved, he destroyed it
Oh,
in
yeah.
that 10 years. And then the PP came in 2000
10 and 10.
10, and everything that they achieved, and to lift the standard of living for the common people, the working class and poor, the vulnerable, the book grant and the computers and so on, and the book and the baby grant, that was to help who? That is to help the poor and vulnerable people in the society. And who are they? They're the people now who turned 19 in the last 10 years. In the last 9 years, a 10-year-old back in 2010 is now 19 years old.
Mm-hmm. No, 14,
14, sorry.
24 years. 24 years.
Yeah, but yeah, correct. 24 years, and those are the people we see running around with guns.
Mhm.
The 19 to 24-year-olds are the people who are running around with guns.
Yeah, even at a lower age, 15 and 16 and 17 and 18.
And if
Yeah,
we look at what is happening in our schools, you mentioned it early with 50% failure rates. That is a horrible thing to think about. For the last 9 years, at 9 to 10,000 students in a school, what is going to happen to these children in the future, in the
it's
next
happening.
5 years?
It's
It's
happening
hap-
already.
it's
Hmm.
happening already. They are useless to society, and the only thing they can do is rob and steal, because they barely have an education, and we have our ministers in government boasting and glorifying the fact that you can fail and get one subject after being in school for 6 years and succeed, and one another one telling us that you could fail mathematics and be a minister in government. So they are glorifying failure.
They have they have removed the meritocracy in education altogether. And when
Correct.
you ask the question, why have you failed? Why have you decided not to publish the list of the first names of the first 200
Correct.
students
That was the
in
first
the
thing they
essay?
did. That was the first thing they did when they went
Yeah.
into government.
And why have you reduced the amount of scholarships from 500 to 50? Why you refuse to have the names of the students published who were scholarship winners, with the exception of the President's Award? So
Correct.
this is a deliberate ploy on the part of Pete Rowley. I blame the Prime Minister himself because he had the opportunity to say, well, this is not to be entertained at all. Publish the names of the students. Is there an ulterior motive in that? And the question has to be answered, but they wouldn't want to answer it because they know the reasons for doing that. And so
But
they move conspicuously to remove meritocracy from education. And when you remove meritocracy, you destroy education.
Well, Dr. David Abdullah, I believe it was about a year ago, made a TikTok video, and he explained it quite nicely what is happening and what the PNM has done with their plantation government. What and the concept of making the rich richer. They needed to keep certain people poor and dependent. They didn't give them independence. We became independence of the PNM. Certain people,
Mhm.
he
Yeah.
made it very clear. He said a certain demographic was deliberately kept back. They can't go to the bank and get loans. They don't have land tenure for the lands that they on the hills there. The people in Tobago suffered for that. They in housing. The people who they took their land to build the extension for the airport, land that they occupied from since slavery was abolished. They took their land and they gave them for 500,000, and they gave them a plot, and they can't equate that to what the facilities they had, their trees, their fruits, and so on. They can't even build the equivalent house. They don't have water and lights. It was on the news just 2 weeks ago.
Mm.
So that is
Into,
that
into
was
Tobago.
deliberate to keep back a certain demographic, so that they will
Any-
have menial minimum wage workers for their friends and financiers.
Anyway, thank you very much for our
thank you very much,
conversation.
Doc.
Yeah,
Thank
Yes,
you very
doctor.
appreciate
much.
it.
Thank you very much.
Okay, then
Very
good
kind
night,
of you.
everybody. Thank you all listening audience for joining us, and we will continue the conversation to educate our people both inside and outside the country before the next election, so you fully understand what the new government will be about, our UNC government, and we are about giving people a second chance, rebuilding and revamping our country. Thank you very much, Doc.
It's
Good
a
night.
pleasure and a privilege. Oh, bye. Have a good night.